I'd like to begin by telling you a story that I remember my dad telling back when I was a boy. It was about a boy that kind of had the same kind of problem I did when I was small. I used to fight a lot. I lived in Michigan, and I often said in order to survive, you had to learn to fight. Well, that wasn't really true. I just had a temper that I had a little trouble controlling. So every time I heard this story, when my dad would tell the story, I'd always think of myself for some reason, because I always got in fights. But the story went like this, that one day a father came home from work, and as he drove up into his driveway, his son was in a fight with a neighbor boy. And they were just battling it out. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, they were scratching and rolling and wrestling and hitting, and they were both a mess. And so the father went over and he broke up the fight. And he sent the neighbor boy on home, and he took his own son inside. And he said, "Son, we need to have a talk." And he said, "We need to talk about this fighting of yours. And you're going to have to get control of that temper of yours. And you're going to have to learn how to be a little more patient. And you're going to have to learn how to be a little more tolerant and just stop fighting over every little thing that happens." And he said, "I've realized I've talked to you before. We've gone over this over and over and over again. This is not the first time. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a little technique to help you keep your temper. The next time you start getting angry with someone, I want you to count to 10. Just count to 10. You're going to be amazed at the difference that will take place." And the little boy promised his dad, because his dad wasn't actually going to whip him that time, so he promised his dad that that's what he would do. Well, it wasn't just a few days later, the father came driving home from work again, and there was his son sitting on top of the neighbor boy, straddling him out in the yard. And he was really upset, and he went running over to him, and he said, "Son, I thought you promised me that the next time you lost your temper, you're going to count to 10. He said, "I am, Dad. I'm just making sure he's here when I get through." Now, that's the world's idea of patience. Put up with something only so long, and then let them have it. It is in direct contradiction to that kind of an attitude, or that kind of approach, that Paul writes in Galatians 5:22. "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." By the time we finish this series, I have a feeling you'll all be able to quote that verse. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We've talked about love, we've talked about peace, we've talked about joy. Today, I want to talk about patience. Now, as I said, it is exactly against the actions of that little boy that Paul writes about the fruit of the Spirit. Because when left up to the natural man, we are not patient people by nature. Occasionally, you will run into someone who is a patient person. But by nature, most of us, we have our limits. We have our lines. It's kind of like Simon Peter asking Jesus that time, "How many times do I have to forgive him?" You know, do as many as 7 times, meaning 7 times in one day. That's what he meant. 7 times in one day? And Jesus said, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. That's 490. Obviously, what he was saying was, don't put limitations on your ability to forgive. Now, why am I mentioning that? Because we're going to find that patience involves that process called forgiveness. You cannot separate the two. Now, actually, there's 2 different words used for patience in the New Testament. And part of our confusion when we say the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, when we get to that word patience, part of the confusion is that we are confusing the 2 words, and we kind of, in our language, have blended the 2 together, but they're not really the same thing. All right? For example, the first word that's used for patience, not the word that Paul uses here, but the other word that is usually translated patience, or be patient, it's the same variation of the same word. It means to endure, to hold on, to have the strength of being able to last out something. Now, that's the kind of patience we usually talk about when we're saying, well, don't be so impatient. In other words, you're in such a hurry for something to happen. You're impatient for something to take place. And so we use the word be patient, meaning wait. Just wait. Wait without anxiety. Wait without fretting. Just wait and give time. Now that's the word that's used whenever James writes, consider it joy, my brothers, when you find yourselves in all kinds of trials, because trials produce patience. Same thing that Paul writes when he talks about our tribulation in the book of Romans. Our tribulations produce patience, and patience produces character, and character produces hope. And he goes on this way. What they're talking about is a word that is translated as patience, but it actually means to simply be able to restrain yourself and just wait and hold on without losing faith, without losing hope, without giving up, without quitting. And that's the way we use the word patient a lot of times, is when we say a person has no patience. That's the kind of patience we're talking about. And you know the joke. Say, Lord, give me patience and give it to me right now. You know, it's this idea, we don't like anything to last very long. And so we want things quickly. In fact, our society today is really in a bind because we have become a fast food, fast response, quick acting. I sat down on the computer. The computer's a miracle thing. I mean, the very fact that a computer can do all the things that it does is a miracle. And I sit there impatiently waiting because it takes about a minute to a minute and a half to get everything ready. And I can't wait that long. And I find myself getting impatient. When just a few years ago, I didn't even have it to rely on. I didn't even have it. And that's the way it is. When we get used to something that we want it to be a little faster. And so we know we have a problem with patience. But that's not what Paul's talking about here. That's a whole different subject. It is important. It's important in our life because that kind of patience is needed. But what Paul is talking about here in Galatians 5:22 is a word that, though it is translated patience, it really does not deal with simply enduring time. That kind of patience, Jesus refers to, blessed is he who is able to endure to the end, has patience, can wait, hold on, persevere. What Paul is talking about in Galatians 5:22 is translated not even as patience in the King James. And I think the King James here is a better translation because it really captures the meaning of what Paul is saying here. When he's talking about the fruit of the Spirit. Now understand, fruit of the Spirit means what the Holy Spirit is wanting to develop within our lives. This is not something we can just have naturally. It's not something we can just decide we're going to do on our own. It is something that is the byproduct of loving relationship with God that produces peace and joy. And out of the peace and the joy comes this kind of, quote, patience. And King James translates this word as long-suffering. Long-suffering. Now that gives us a clue as to what this word actually means. Because you see, this is a relationship word. Whereas the other word, patience, deals simply with us and endurance, putting up with things for a long period of time. This word has to do with relationship. It is being willing to endure in relation to other people, not just to situations, but in relationship to other people. And literally, this word could be understood in this way. And the word long-suffering actually catches it. To suffer for a long period of time. To be willing to suffer and endure suffering or pain at the hands of others without reprisal, without wanting to get even, without retribution. In this carries the idea of acting toward other people who are not necessarily acting back toward you in the same way, but continuing to act toward them with loving kindness, to continue in the midst of suffering. And I mean by suffering, I don't mean that it necessarily has to be actual physical pain. This can be emotional pain. It can be the fact that you are willing to endure the idiosyncrasies of others, the oddities of others, that you're willing to endure the hostility of others, you're willing to endure the mistakes of others, and to give them the benefit of love and grace. To extend to them mercy, and not Well, I'm not going to have anything else to do with you because of the way you act. Or I'm just going to wash you away, or I'm just going to write you off because of this thing or that thing. But having the ability that is not natural. It is not natural. It is God-given ability to be able to endure, I like to say, I'm going to use this word, the idiocy, sometimes the stupidity of others without anger, without offendedness, and that without a desire for revenge. Now, when I put it in those terms, every one of us probably can cringe a little bit because we know that is a failing in most of our lives. Because we get irritated with people. We let little things irritate us. We let little things offend us. We let things get under our skin. We let things bother us. And because of that, we find that we are not patient with people because they should know better. They should know better. You know, I've often found it interesting that Jesus prayed, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. My question would be, well, what if they'd known what they were doing? Jesus, would you have said, Father, forgive them, even though they know what they're doing? And the answer would, yes. Yes, even though they were putting to death the King of Glory. Father, forgive them, even if they know what they are doing. That's patience. That's what we're talking about. It is a reflection and actually an aspect of love being manifested in our lives. Whenever I am able to show love toward you, then I am able to be patient with you. When you're able to show love toward me, that means you will exhibit patience toward me. You see, the kind of patience that Paul is talking about here is relational. It has to do with your dealings with others, or with my dealings with others. And he says, this is not something that the natural man can simply acquire. This is going to come as a gift of God. We said it last week. We were talking about the domino effect, how you cannot have all the fruit of the Spirit until you get your foundation laid. Your foundation is love. And without love, there will be no peace and joy. But you lay a foundation of loving relationship with God and express that loving relationship with God to others, then peace and joy come out of that. That's a gift from God that comes out of the loving relationship with God. And the more time I spend with God, the more that peace and joy builds in my life. The more I am at peace with myself and with God, the more patient I can be with you. If I am not being patient with you, it's because I am not where I should be in my relationship with God. There's a direct correlation. I cannot have this kind of self-denial in my life unless I am in a relationship with God that strips me of myself. Because, see, that's what makes this kind of patience so hard. I mean, the old expression is, I have to die, and I don't like dying. I have to die to my own opinion. I have to die to wanting to always be right. I have to die to the sake of getting even. I have to die to the feelings of anger or the feelings of irritation or the feelings of offendedness. I have to be, and this is what Paul was talking about when he said, we are crucified with Christ. A dead person cannot sin. You can't tempt a dead person. And if myself, my claim of my rights or my self-interest is crucified with Christ, then I can't be offended. Because offended comes from my self-interest being attacked in some way. Self-interest could be, I'm being attacked personally and I feel like I need to defend myself, or what I feel is right is being attacked and I feel like I have to defend it, or my sense of the way I want to see things happen is being attacked and I want to defend that. And when that happens, I cannot be patient with you or with anyone because I am on the defensive. And when I'm on the defensive, I am protecting myself. So what has to happen for me to be able to be patient, I have to allow that part of me to be crucified with Christ. I have to allow, literally, my self-interest that rules my life, that wants to run everything that I am. I have to allow it to be literally nailed on the cross right along with Jesus and die. Does that mean I cannot take interest in myself? No, it's not the same thing. Taking interest in myself is showing love to me. And I'm told to love others as I love myself. I am not supposed to hate me, but at the same time, I am not supposed to let my own interests rule me. That's the difference. Patience grows out of dying to self-interest. The more I'm able to die to my own interests, then the more I'm able to be patient toward other people. Why? Because I'm at peace. Do you know what produces such great peace? When I realize that I don't have to worry about taking care of me, God will do that for me. I don't have to worry about things working out the way I want them to, because God's going to make them work out the way they ought to, as long as I'm trusting in Him. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him. He will direct your paths. That if I'm trusting in the Lord, He's going to take better care of me than I could. And when I can accept that, and when I can live in that, and when I can release myself to that, then I have peace. That's that relationship with God growing. And when I have that peace, then I can take things that you might say or do that normally might offend me, and they don't mean anything at all to me. I'm able to extend to you the kind of patience that Paul is talking about here. What do you think? I think it's Peter who writes, love covers a multitude of sins. You know what that means? When I am walking in love, the sins, meaning things done that would normally offend me, don't matter. I may see them and I may think, you shouldn't do that, or I wish you wouldn't do that, but they just don't get to me. They don't get to me. That's what Paul's talking about when he talks about patience as fruit of the Spirit. The ability to deal with differences in other people without irritation, without a desire for revenge, without wanting to see them get theirs. So that when someone says something unkind, rather than wanting to respond to get a dig back, that we patiently ignore what is said and extend to them grace and mercy. Now, do you see why that kind of attitude can only come about as a result of the Holy Spirit working in our lives? Because that is not natural. That is not the world's way. The world would look at the person who forgives and say, that's odd. That's crazy. And yet, forgiveness is the essential part of patience. And see, forgiveness, I've always said, and I firmly believe, forgiveness is the highest expression of love. Because you can have feelings for someone, but when you're able to forgive someone, you have extended to them not only the kind of grace and mercy that God has given to you, which is the highest expression of love, but you have also said of yourself, I am not important. I am not more important than you are. I have died to me. And I have elevated you. And in doing that, I have achieved the highest expression of love. Patience says, I will not allow you to offend me. I will not choose to take offense of what you do or what you say. I will extend to you grace and mercy, and I will overlook the things with which I may disagree or which are different from the way I would do them or different from the way that I think. And I will extend to you love. That's the kind of patience that Paul is talking about here. That kind of patience doesn't just happen. It's like planting peas in a garden. You don't stick them in the ground one day and harvest them the next. It takes time for them to grow. And this kind of patience has to be cultivated. And where it's cultivated is not in our dealings with others. Where it's cultivated is in our dealings with God. Because the more we are able to lose ourselves, give up our own identity, give up our own rights in our relationship with God, then the more we find that we are able to overlook those things in other people. And so the way that we cultivate it, and this will be said with every one of these fruits of the Spirit, I go back to the same theme over and over. The way we cultivate that patience is in our prayer time. The way we cultivate that patience is in spending time with the Lord. The way we cultivate that patience is in letting God involve Himself in our lives. It's much like the parable of the man who owed his king something like, and the estimates vary. It's between, it said 1,000 talents. If it was 1,000 talents of gold, it was $40 billion. If it was 1,000 talents of silver, it would be like $40 million. Well, let's take the lower figure. Let's say it was 1,000 talents of silver, and he owed his king 1,000 talents of silver. The king was going to have him put in prison. And he said, "Please have mercy on me." And the man pleaded his life before the king, and the king extended him forgiveness. He not only forgave him, but he forgave the entire debt. He wiped it off the book. And then the man went out, and there was a guy who owed him about $5,000, the equivalent. And he grabbed him and he said, "Pay me what you owe me." And he says, "I can't. Have mercy on me." He said, "No." And he threw him in prison and said, "Keep him in prison until he can pay me my debt." And Jesus said, the king, when he heard, the other servants saw what was going on, and the king was told, and he was furious. And they said, "Bring in that servant." And he said, "I forgave you that great debt, and yet you would not forgive others?" He said, "I'm going to turn you over to the torturers until that debt is paid." You see, God looks very seriously on our living out the relationship that we have with Him. And that's why I say, if you want to develop patience, you better concentrate on your relationship with God first, because that's going to be the foundation. You're not going to be able to be patient simply by act of your own will. None of us is going to be able to extend patience. Why? We'll do it for a little while, and then things will start getting to us again. What they say, it's the gnats that are the most irritating, the little things that buzz around, get in your ears, get in your eyes, you know. The snake you could dodge. I mean, the snake runs away and you run away from it and it's gone. The little gnats won't give up. They just hang around. It's the little bitty things. And after a while, the little gnats of a relationship begin to eat at you and begin to irritate you. The only way is to spray your life with off. And the off is the presence of God. And it keeps the gnats, they're still there, but they don't bother you anymore. That's the only way to do that. And so we find that the way to develop this kind of patience with, again, not the endurance patience, but the patience with others. Being able to relate to them in a proper way. Being able to relate to them in a loving way. Being able to endure. Being able to overlook. Being able to not let things get to us. Comes about when we spray our lives, fill our lives with the Holy Spirit. And we quit thinking so much about ourselves and start thinking more about how God would have us to be, how God would have us develop. So when Paul says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, he says it's the ability to endure even when love is not shown back, even when nothing changes in the other person. The ability to endure the irritations, the differences, and the difficulties without losing your love and without losing your grace. And that comes only when the Holy Spirit is given the freedom to work in your life the way He wants to. That's why we need the leadership of the Lord. That's why we need His presence in our lives. It just ain't going to happen without Him. Or if it happens, it won't last. It's kind of like a crash diet. When you start eating regular food again, all the weight comes back. What is needed is a lifestyle change. And only God can produce that kind of lifestyle change.